Today we are going to tell you the Taíno world before and after 1492, what really was life like for the people Columbus met. Imagine stepping onto a sun-drenched Caribbean shore where the air is thick with the scent of blooming flowers and salty sea breeze. Palm trees sway gently overhead, their fronds whispering in the trade winds. Crystal clear waters lap at white sands, and in the distance, lush green hills rise like emerald waves frozen in time. This is not a fantasy paradise. This was the everyday reality for hundreds of thousands, perhaps even millions, of people living across the islands we now call the Greater Antilles, Hispaniola, Puerto Rico, Jamaica, Eastern Cuba, and the Bahamas. These were the Taíno, a people whose world was rich, balanced, and deeply connected to the land, sea, and spirits that animated everything around them. Before October 12, 1492, when 3 European ships appeared on the horizon, the Taíno had thrived here for centuries. Their story begins far to the south, in the vast river systems of what is today Venezuela and the Orinoco Delta. Descendants of Arawak-speaking peoples, they embarked on remarkable voyages in large dugout canoes, navigating open ocean currents and island-hopping northward. By around 400 BC to AD 1000, these migrations had brought them to dominate the northern Caribbean. They called their homeland Haiti, Boracay, Zaymaca, names evoking strength, nobility, and abundance. On the island Columbus would rename Hispaniola, their population may have numbered anywhere from several 100,000 to over 1 million souls, living in well-organized villages scattered across fertile valleys, coastal plains, and hilly interiors. What strikes anyone who studies the Taíno is how harmonious their society appeared to be, gentle, communal, and remarkably efficient. They were not a warlike people in the way we often imagine ancient societies. While they defended their territories against occasional raids from neighboring groups like the Caribs to the south, internal conflicts were rare. Instead, their world revolved around cooperation, family ties, and a deep respect for the natural order. At the heart of Taíno life was the village, or yucayeques. These were circular settlements of anywhere from a few dozen to several thousand people, centered around a spacious plaza called the deity. This open court served as the social, ceremonial, and recreational hub, much like the village square in old European towns, but alive with song, dance, and sacred rituals. Surrounding the deity stood rows of bohios, large, circular homes built from wooden poles lashed together, walls woven from palm leaves and thatch, roofs steeply pitched to shed the frequent tropical rains. A typical bohio might house an extended family, grandparents, parents, children, aunts, uncles, all under one roof, sleeping in hammocks woven from soft cotton fibers. These hammocks, by the way, were one of the many Taíno innovations that Europeans would adopt. The word itself comes from their language. Society was matrilineal, meaning descent and inheritance passed through the mother's line. This gave women significant status. They owned land, passed down family names, and played key roles in agriculture and community decisions. At the top stood the cacique, the hereditary chief, sometimes male, sometimes female, who ruled with the advice of elders and shamans. The cacique ensured fairness, assigning tasks, distributing food equally, mediating disputes, and leading ceremonies. Below the cacique were the Taínos, a noble class of advisors and warriors, and the Naborias, the common people who formed the backbone of daily labor. There were even a small number of servants or captives from conflicts, but slavery as Europeans understood it, brutal, hereditary, profit-driven, was absent here. The cacique's home, often larger and more ornate, stood near the central plaza, sometimes elevated on a platform for visibility and prestige. Yet even the highest chief lived modestly compared to European kings, no vast palaces of stone, no hoarded treasures. Wealth was measured in generosity, in how well one provided for the people. Tribute flowed upward in the form of food, cotton, or labor, but it circled back in feasts, protection, and spiritual guidance. Daily life flowed with the rhythms of the sun, seasons, and sea. Men and women rose at dawn to the calls of tropical birds. Tasks were divided but not rigidly gendered. Both helped in the fields, though women excelled at processing crops and men at fishing and canoe building. Children played freely, learning through observation and games. Elders told stories around evening fires, passing down history, myths, and wisdom in oral traditions that needed no written script. But the true foundation of Taíno prosperity was their agriculture, an ingenious, sustainable system that fed large populations with minimal toil. Their staple was cassava, or yucca, a tough root crop loaded with cyanide in its raw form. The Taíno had mastered detoxification centuries earlier. Women grated the roots on stone tools, squeezed out the poisonous juice in woven baskets, and baked the resulting flour into flat, crisp cassé bread on flat clay griddles called burens. This bread kept for months, perfect for storage or trade. Fields were not plowed in straight rows like in Europe. Instead, farmers created conucos, large raised mounds of earth mixed with organic matter, sometimes 3 feet high and several yards across. These mounds improved drainage in the rainy climate, prevented erosion, and enriched the soil. Cassava thrived here alongside sweet potatoes, maize, beans, squash, peanuts, peppers, and cotton. Tobacco grew in small patches for ceremonial use. The system was so efficient that after initial clearing, fields required little weeding or maintenance. Some estimates suggest Taíno farmers worked far fewer hours than their European counterparts, leaving ample time for art, ritual, and leisure. Fishing supplemented the diet richly. Men paddled out in canoes, some large enough for dozens of people, using nets, lines, hooks of bone, and weirs. They caught snapper, grouper, shellfish, and sea turtles. Inland, they hunted small game like hucia, a rodent, birds, and lizards with bows, arrows, and snares. No large mammals roamed these islands, so protein came mostly from the sea and modest hunting. This abundance fostered a culture of sharing. Food was communal, everyone ate well, and no one went hungry if the village prospered. The Taíno believed in balance: take only what you need, give thanks to the spirits, and ensure the land remains fertile for generations. And spirituality. It infused every moment. The Taíno worldview was animistic. Everything held a spirit: trees, rivers, winds, animals. Central were the zemis or semis, sacred beings embodied in carved idols of wood, stone, shell, or bone. These represented ancestors, deities, and forces of nature. The supreme creator was Yúcahu, lord of cassava and the sea, often depicted in 3-pointed stone zemis buried in conucos to bless the crops. Atabey, the mother of waters and fertility, watched over birth and growth. Shamans, called bihiks, bridged the human and spirit worlds. They healed with herbs, performed rituals, and entered trances. One of the most profound ceremonies involved cohoba, a hallucinogenic snuff made from seeds of the cajabana tree, mixed with shells and tobacco. Inhaled through tubes during nighttime rites, it induced visions, prophecy, healing, and communion with zemis. Bihik, seated on a ceremonial duho stool intricately carved with animal or spirit motifs, would guide the experience while villagers chanted. The greatest communal expression was the areyto, all-night song dances in the Beatty Plaza. Men and women formed circles or lines, moving to drum beats and maracas, singing epic poems that recounted history, myths, victories, and genealogies. These were not mere entertainment. They preserved knowledge, honored the dead, celebrated births, and strengthened bonds. Sometimes areytos marked battles or ball games on the same plaza courts, where teams competed with a rubber ball in a ritual sport blending athleticism and symbolism. Art flourished in everyday objects: exquisite pottery with swirling designs, woven cotton belts dyed red from annatto, stone axes polished to perfection, gold nuggets worn as nose rings or pendants. Gold was decorative, not currency. Body painting in red, black, and white marked special occasions. Everything reflected harmony with nature, no grand monuments, but beauty in the functional and sacred. As the sun sets over Yúcayeques, drums echo softly, voices rise in an areyto under starlit skies, and the people feel connected to each other, to ancestors, to the living earth. This was the Taíno world, peaceful, resourceful, spiritually rich, and enduring. But that world was about to change forever. As the last notes of an areyto fade into the night and the village settles into quiet rest, hammocks swaying gently in the warm breeze, no one in the Yúcayeques could have imagined that within days the entire rhythm of their world would be shattered forever. The year is 1492. Far across the Eastern Ocean, 3 small ships carrying about 90 men have been sailing for weeks under the command of a determined but misguided Genoese mariner named Cristobal Colon, Christopher Columbus. He believes he has reached the outer edges of Asia. The Taíno, of course, have no concept of Europe, Asia, or the vast Atlantic that separates these worlds. To them, the horizon has always been the edge of known waters, crossed only by their own ancestors in ancient times. On the morning of October 12, according to the European calendar, a lookout cries out from the crow's nest of the Pinta. Land. The ships approach a small island in the Bahamas chain, Guanahani, the Taíno call it. Columbus names it San Salvador. As the boats lower and row toward shore, a group of curious Taíno paddle out in their canoes to meet these strange floating houses with white wings. The Europeans are pale, bearded, dressed in heavy clothing unsuited to the heat, carrying metal objects that gleam in the sun. The Taíno, naked or lightly adorned with cotton bands and body paint, greet them with smiles, offering parrots, balls of cotton thread, spears tipped with fish bones, and fruits. They speak in a melodic language, gesturing welcomingly. Columbus records in his journal that they are very well formed, with handsome bodies and good faces, and that they ought to make good and skilled servants. From the Taíno perspective, these newcomers are otherworldly. Their skin is the color of cassava paste, their beards strange growths, their speech incomprehensible, yet they do not immediately seem hostile. The Taíno offer food, cassé bread, roasted fish, sweet potatoes, and in return receive glass beads, little bells, and red caps. The exchange feels like a meeting between spirits or distant kin. Some Taíno believe these men might be from the realm of the zemis, perhaps messengers of Yúcahu or Atabey. There is wonder, not fear, at first. Columbus stays only a few days on Guanahani before moving on, seeking the gold he is convinced lies nearby, the spices and silks of Cipango, Japan, he expects to find. He takes 7 Taíno men aboard as captives to learn their language and serve as guides. They go willingly at first, curious about the great canoes and the bearded strangers. Over the following weeks, the fleet islands hops southward through the Bahamas, then sights the much larger landmass of Cuba. Columbus names it Juana. Here too the Taíno welcome them. Villages line the coasts, caciques offer hospitality. One chief, Yúcayeques on the northern coast of what will become Hispaniola, hosts Columbus lavishly when the Santa Maria runs aground on Christmas Eve 1492. The wreck becomes a source of timber. The Taíno help salvage what they can. Yúcayeques gives Columbus gold ornaments, masks, and promises more. In gratitude, Columbus leaves 39 men behind at a makeshift settlement called La Navidad, built from the ship's timbers. He promises to return soon. These first months appear almost idyllic in European accounts, peaceful trade, mutual curiosity, gifts exchanged. But already the seeds of catastrophe are sown. Columbus is obsessed with gold. He questions the Taíno relentlessly about where it comes from. They point to rivers in the interior, to small nuggets worn as jewelry. To them, gold is decorative, a gift from the earth spirits, not a measure of power or wealth. Columbus sees only riches for Spain's monarchs. He demands more. When the supply seems slow, frustration grows. When Columbus returns to Hispaniola in late 1493 on his second voyage, this time with 17 ships and over 1,000 men, the mood has shifted dramatically. La Navidad has been destroyed. The 39 men he left behind are dead. Accounts differ. Some say the Spaniards quarreled among themselves and abused local women, provoking retaliation. Others suggest neighboring caciques attacked after the Europeans demanded tribute and behaved arrogantly. Whatever the truth, the fort is burned, bodies scattered. Yúcayeques claims he tried to protect them but was overpowered by rivals. Columbus does not believe him entirely. From this moment, the relationship sours irreversibly. The second voyage is explicitly colonial. Settlers, soldiers, livestock, tools for mining. Columbus establishes a new base farther east, calling it Isabella. He imposes the encomienda system in embryonic form, assigning groups of Taíno to Spanish overseers to provide labor and tribute, especially gold. The order goes out. Every Taíno over 14 must deliver a certain quota of gold dust every 3 months. Those who comply receive a copper token to wear around their necks as proof. Failure brings punishment, whippings, mutilation, enslavement. The Taíno have no concept of such relentless extraction. Their gold was alluvial, panned in small amounts during dry seasons as a pastime or for adornment. Now rivers are panned day and night under guard. Fields lie untended as men and women are forced into labor gangs. Cassava crops rot in the ground, famine creeps in. European diseases arrive with the newcomers, smallpox first, then measles, influenza, typhus. The Taíno have no immunity. Whole villages fall ill within days. Fevers burn through families. Children die in their mother's arms. Bihiks try every remedy, herbal baths, cohoba visions, chants to the zemis, but nothing stops the invisible enemy. Spanish chroniclers later estimate that within the first decade, hundreds of thousands perish from disease alone. Resistance begins quietly, then grows. Some caciques submit under duress. Others flee to the mountains. The central Cordillera of Hispaniola becomes a refuge. In 1494–1495, a major rebellion erupts under the leadership of Yúcahu and Atabey, a powerful cacique from the Maguana region. He is said to have been one of the most respected leaders, tall and commanding. Yúcahu and Atabey organizes warriors from several chiefdoms. They attack Spanish outposts, burn fields meant for tribute. Columbus responds with brutal force. In 1495, he launches a large punitive expedition. Hundreds of Taíno are captured in a surprise attack at dawn. Many are shackled and sent to Isabella. The most infamous episode comes in 1496. Yúcahu and Atabey is tricked into a meeting under pretense of peace. Spanish captain Alonso de Ojeda invites him to try on iron manacles, claiming they are royal ornaments from Spain. When Yúcahu and Atabey places his hands in the cuffs, they are locked. He is taken prisoner, placed in chains, and shipped to Spain. On the voyage he dies, some say of heartbreak, others of illness. His capture breaks the spirit of many. Another leader, Garionex, tries negotiation but is eventually executed. By 1497, large-scale armed resistance is crushed, though guerrilla bands continue harassing settlements for years. The demographic collapse is staggering. Bartolomé de las Casas, a Dominican friar who arrived in 1502 and later became the Taíno's most vocal defender, writes in his brief account of the destruction of the Indies that when Columbus first arrived, Hispaniola supported more than 3 million souls. By the time Las Casas writes in the 1540s, he estimates fewer than 200 Taíno remain on the island. Modern historians debate the starting figure. Some place it between 250,000 and 1 million, but all agree the decline was catastrophic, 90% or more lost within 50 years. Disease was the primary killer, but starvation, overwork, despair, mass suicides, and direct violence all contributed. Mothers killed their infants rather than see them enslaved. Whole communities leaped from cliffs or took poison made from local plants. The cultural devastation was equally profound. Areytos were forbidden as pagan. Zemi worship was suppressed, idols smashed or hidden. Bihiks were persecuted as sorcerers. The cohoba rites, once central to spiritual life, were driven underground or lost. The language itself began to fade as Spanish became dominant and survivors intermixed with Africans and Europeans. Yet fragments endured, words like barbacoa, barbecue, canoa, canoe, hamaca, hammock, tobacco, tobacco, maize, maize entered Spanish and from there spread globally. Cassava processing techniques survived in rural areas. Conuco agriculture influenced Caribbean farming long after. By the mid-1500s, official records declare the Taíno extinct on many islands, but extinction was never total. In remote mountain regions, in hidden coves, small groups survived. Women married Spanish men or African laborers brought to replace Taíno labor in mines and fields. Their children, mestizos, carried Taíno blood, knowledge, stories. In Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic especially, oral traditions persisted. Families whispered prayers to Atabey under Catholic saints' names. Herbal remedies from Taíno pharmacopoeia continued in curanderismo healing practices. The rapid transformation after 1492 was not merely loss, it was a forced fusion. The Caribbean became a crucible where Taíno, Spanish, and African worlds collided and blended. Cassava remained the island staple. hammocks became universal, tobacco spread worldwide, and in the bloodlines of millions of modern Caribbean people, especially in the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, and Cuba, Taíno ancestry survives, often unrecognized until recent DNA studies began revealing percentages of indigenous heritage in the population. Today, a revival is underway. In Boracay, Puerto Rico, groups self-identify as Taíno descendants. They rebuild deities, carve new zemis, hold areytos, teach the language reconstructed from colonial dictionaries. In the Dominican Republic, communities in the mountains perform ceremonies blending Catholic and Taíno elements. Artists create pottery echoing ancient designs. Activists push for recognition of Taíno heritage in national identity. They argue that extinction was a colonial myth used to justify land seizure and erasure. The Taíno never vanished completely. They adapted, hid, intermingled, and now reclaim. This is the story that bridges before and after, a people who welcomed strangers with open hands, who lived in balance with land and spirit, only to face a cataclysm no prophecy could foresee. Yet their legacy whispers in every cassava field, every hammock strung between palms, every word we still use from their tongue. Taíno world did not end in 1492. It transformed, endured, and in quiet ways continues. As the stars wheel above the same Caribbean shores where those first canoes once paddled out to meet strange ships, the echoes remain. The deity may be silent now, but the spirit of the Taíno, resilient, generous, deeply rooted, has never truly left. The destruction of La Navidad marked more than the loss of 39 European lives. It signaled the irreversible turning point in Taíno history. What had begun as a meeting of wonder and curiosity hardened into a system of domination that would reshape the islands forever. To understand the depth of this transformation, we must step closer into the lived experience of the Taíno people during those first chaotic decades after contact. We must walk with them through the villages that slowly emptied, the fields that went untended, the deities where silence replaced song, and the hidden places where fragments of their world clung to survival. Let us begin with the encomienda in its earliest, most brutal form. Columbus, appointed governor and viceroy by the Spanish crown, needed to justify the expense of his voyages and satisfy the expectations of Ferdinand and Isabella. Gold was the key. In 1495, he decreed that every Taíno adult must provide a hawk's bell full of gold dust every 3 months, or in areas where gold was scarce, 25 pounds of spun cotton. The bell quota was small in volume but impossible in practice for most. The Taíno panned rivers seasonally. Sustained daily labor yielded little, yet failure meant the loss of hands, ears, or life itself. Spanish overseers, often rough soldiers or opportunistic settlers, enforced these demands with whips, stocks, and dogs trained to hunt runaways. Imagine a young Taíno man named Atabey, perhaps 20 summers old, from a coastal yucayeques near what is now Puerto Plata. Before 1492, his days revolved around fishing at dawn, helping his mother and sisters tend conucos, joining evening areytos, and learning from his uncle, a Behique, the secrets of Cohoba visions. Now he is marched at spear point to a riverbank where he stands knee-deep in cold water from sunrise to sunset, swirling sediment in wooden pans, hoping for the glint of yellow flakes. His back burns from lash marks received the previous week when his quota fell short. His wife remains in the village, trying to keep cassava plants alive while caring for their infant, but hunger gnaws at them all. The child grows thin, milk dries up. When Atabey returns empty-handed again, the overseer chains him to a post in the plaza of Isabella for public punishment. Neighbors watch in helpless silence, knowing their turn may come next. Women suffered uniquely. The matrilineal structure that once empowered them eroded under colonial demands. Spanish men took Taíno women as concubines or wives, often by force or coercion. These unions produced mestizo children, but the mothers frequently lost status and autonomy. Some women were forced into domestic service in Spanish households, grinding maize, a new crop introduced by Europeans, or washing clothes in the European style. Others labored in the fields alongside men, their traditional roles in crop processing and weaving disrupted. The birth rate plummeted, not only from disease and malnutrition, but from despair. Chroniclers like Las Casas describe mothers smothering newborns to spare them a life of servitude, or families choosing collective suicide by drinking poisonous yucca juice or leaping from high cliffs into the sea. Disease struck like an unseen hurricane. Smallpox arrived with the second voyage in 1493, spreading before many even saw a Spaniard. A village might wake to find half its people feverish, skin erupting in painful pustules. Survivors bore scars for life, many were blinded. Measles followed, then influenza, then typhus carried by lice in the crowded conditions of forced labor camps. The Taíno pharmacopoeia, effective against local fevers, snake bites, and wounds, was powerless against these old-world pathogens. Bihiks held desperate ceremonies, inhaling cohoba to seek guidance from the zemis, but visions brought only warnings of more suffering. In some communities, entire generations vanished within months. A cacique might bury his last child, then watch his nobles and naborias follow one by one until he stood alone in an empty bohio. Amid this horror, resistance took many forms. Some was open and military. Cayenabo's uprising in 1494–1495 stands out as the most organized. Ruling the fertile Maguana region in central Hispaniola, Cayenabo commanded respect across chiefdoms. Tall, muscular, with a commanding presence, he rallied warriors armed with wooden macanas, clubs edged with sharp stones, bows, and fire-hardened spears. They struck at isolated Spanish parties, burned conucos planted for tribute, and disrupted supply lines. Columbus countered with terror tactics. In March 1495, his brother Bartolomé led a force that captured hundreds in a dawn raid. Captives were paraded through Isabella in chains, some were sold into slavery and shipped to Spain. The capture of Cayenabo himself became legend. In 1496, Alonso de Ojeda, a daring but ruthless captain, approached under flag of truce. He invited Cayenabo to inspect royal fetters from the Spanish king, iron manacles disguised as ornaments. Cayenabo, proud and trusting the protocols of chiefly hospitality, allowed them to be placed on his wrists. The cuffs snapped shut. He was bound, carried to the coast, and loaded onto a ship. During the Atlantic crossing, weakened by chains and grief, he died. His loss shattered the confidence of many caciques. Garionex, ruler of the Magua region and once an ally of Columbus, attempted diplomacy. He offered tribute and even requested Christian baptism to buy peace. But when demands escalated, he too rebelled. Captured in 1497, he was sent to Spain but drowned when his ship sank off Cadiz. Smaller acts of defiance persisted longer. Runaways fled to the rugged Cibao Mountains or the Bajoruco Range in the south, forming maroon communities that raided plantations and preserved traditions in secret. Some women hid zemis in caves, passing them to daughters. Oral histories were whispered at night, areyto songs transformed into coded laments. The Taíno did not disappear quietly. They resisted in ways both visible and invisible. By the early 1500s, the encomienda evolved into a more formalized system of forced labor. Taíno were entrusted to Spanish encomenderos who promised Christian instruction in exchange for work in mines, farms, or pearl fisheries after discoveries in the nearby Pearl Coast. Promises of religious education were rarely fulfilled. Instead, villages were relocated closer to Spanish settlements for easier control. The repartimiento de indios assigned workers seasonally, tearing families apart. Hunger became chronic. Cassava fields, once abundant, were converted to European crops like wheat or sugar cane to feed settlers. Native agriculture collapsed under the strain. African slaves began arriving in significant numbers by the 1510s to replace the dwindling Taíno workforce. These men and women, kidnapped from West and Central Africa, brought their own cultures, spiritualities, and resistance traditions. In isolated areas, Taíno and Africans intermingled, forming alliances. Runaway communities, Cimarron in Spanish, sometimes included both groups. Shared experiences of oppression fostered bonds. Some African spiritual practices blended with Taíno zemi reverence in syncretic forms that would later influence Vodou and Santeria. Bartolomé de las Casas provides one of the most detailed eyewitness accounts. Arriving as a young encomendero in 1502, he initially profited from the system, but witnessing massacres, suicides, and the sight of skeletal Taíno workers collapsing in gold streams changed him. He freed his own encomienda Indians, became a Dominican friar, and spent decades advocating for indigenous rights. His writings, especially the brief account, catalog atrocities: villages burned for failing quotas, children sold into slavery, women raped, entire chiefdoms erased. Though his population figures 3 million on Hispaniola are now seen as inflated, his descriptions of suffering remain harrowing and credible. By 1514, a census ordered by the crown found only about 26,000 Taíno on Hispaniola. 10 years later, numbers dropped further. Puerto Rico and Jamaica followed similar trajectories, rapid decline after conquest in 1508-1509. Cuba, invaded in 1511 under Diego Velázquez, saw thousands flee into the interior or commit suicide rather than submit, yet pockets endured. In the mountains of Boracay, Puerto Rico, communities maintained oral traditions and agriculture into the 17th century. Dominican records mention Indios living in remote areas as late as the 1700s. The cultural remnants are perhaps the most poignant legacy. The Taíno language dissolved into Creole dialects, but hundreds of words survived: aji, chili pepper; batata, sweet potato; bohio, hut; cacique, chief; huracan, hurricane; iguana, papaya; sabana, savannah. Agricultural knowledge persisted. Conuco mounds influenced raised bed farming in the Caribbean. Cassava bread remained a staple, prepared exactly as Taíno women once did. Tobacco rituals evolved but never vanished. Zemis, hidden for generations, occasionally surface in archaeological digs or family heirlooms. In the 20th and 21st centuries, this legacy resurfaced powerfully. DNA studies since the 2000s show that up to 10–20% of Puerto Rican, Dominican, and Cuban ancestry traces to Taíno maternal lines, mitochondrial DNA. In Puerto Rico, the Jatibonicu Taíno tribal nation and other groups have organized, petitioning for federal recognition, rebuilding deities, and reviving areytos. They grow cassava traditionally, carve zemis from ceiba wood, and teach children the names of plants and spirits. In the Dominican Republic, the Cibao region hosts cultural festivals blending Taíno elements with Catholic and African traditions. Artists like those in the Taíno cultural movement create pottery, petroglyph-inspired jewelry, and murals depicting pre-contact life. These revival efforts challenge the narrative of total extinction. Scholars now speak of ethnogenesis, the rebirth of identity through adaptation. The Taíno did not survive unchanged, but neither were they annihilated. Their blood, words, foods, and spiritual echoes flow through Caribbean cultures today. When a Puerto Rican family hangs a hammock between mango trees, or a Dominican grandmother prepares casabe for a gathering, or a Cuban child learns that Huracan once named a storm spirit, the Taíno are present. The story of the Taíno before and after 1492 is one of profound beauty and equally profound tragedy. It is a reminder of what was lost when two worlds collided without mutual understanding, and what endures when resilience takes root even in scorched earth. Their world changed in ways no Bahik could prophesy, yet the spirit that once filled the deities with song still whispers on Caribbean winds. The revival of Taíno identity in modern times is not a sudden invention, but a gradual awakening, rooted in the very survivals we have traced through centuries of adaptation and hidden continuity. To fully appreciate this resurgence, we must first return to the deepest layers of Taíno spirituality and mythology, the very foundation that sustained their world before contact and that whispers through the revival efforts today. These beliefs were not abstract doctrines but lived realities, woven into every aspect of daily existence, from planting a conuco to facing the storm or mourning the dead. At the core of Taíno cosmology stood the zemis, powerful spirits, ancestors, and deities embodied in physical objects. The word zemi, or semi, referred both to the supernatural being itself and to its material representation, carved idols of wood, stone, shell, bone, or even cotton stuffed with sacred substances. These were not mere statues, they were alive with mana, the vital force that could heal, protect, predict the future, or bring calamity if neglected. Every cacique and behique possessed personal zemis, often inherited through the matrilineal line, and larger communal ones resided in special structures or caves. The supreme deities formed a pantheon that reflected the natural world. Yúcahu, also Yúcahu or Yúcahu Bagua Mayorikoti, was the great creator, lord of cassava and the sea, the giver of life and abundance. He was often depicted in three-pointed stone zemis buried in conucos to ensure fertile soil and bountiful harvests. His mother Atabey, Atabeyra or Gimazoa, embodied fertility, freshwater, and the moon. She was the nurturing earth mother, protector of women in childbirth and the flow of rivers. Together they represented balance, creation from the depths of the sea and growth on the land. Other powerful beings included Guabensex, the fierce goddess of hurricanes, accompanied by her aides Guadaba, thunder, and Kotrisqui, floods. She could unleash Jurakan, the whirlwind spirit from which hurricane derives when angered, reminding the people of nature's dual benevolence and wrath. Maboya was a night spirit associated with darkness and the underworld, sometimes feared as a bringer of misfortune. Makidayori Guayaba ruled the land of the dead, Coibe, a shadowy realm where souls journeyed after death. Myths told of origins and transformations. One prominent creation story described how the first humans emerged from caves. The world began in darkness within two sacred caves, Casabajagua, principal cave, and Amuna, without snake. The culture hero Demonon Karakarakal and his brothers stole fire, cassava, and other gifts from the supreme being, but in punishment, Demonon was struck by a club that lodged in his back, forming a hump. Another tale explained the origin of the sea. A boy named Guagajana stole women from the men, leading to conflict and the flooding of lands to form islands and oceans. These stories were not static, they lived through the areyto, the grand ceremonial song dance performed in the deity under moonlight or torchlight. Areytos could last all night, with participants forming circles or lines, moving to the rhythm of maracas, rattles made from gourds filled with seeds, drums, meohuacan, hollow logs beaten with sticks, and voices chanting epic poems. The cacique or behique led, recounting genealogies, heroic deeds, victories over Caribs, the deeds of ancestors, or pleas for good harvests. Women often danced with grace, men with vigor. Body paint in red anato, black genipap, and white designs marked participants as sacred beings for the duration. Interwoven with areytos were the cohoba rituals, the most profound spiritual practice. Cohoba was a hallucinogenic snuff prepared from ground seeds of the cajabana or yopo tree, Anadenanthera peregrina, mixed with crushed shells, tobacco, or other plants to intensify effects. Only caciques and behiques typically consumed it, though in major ceremonies others might partake. Preparation involved fasting, purging induced vomiting to cleanse the body, and seclusion. The behique, seated on a carved duho stool, low, four-legged seats often shaped like animals or spirits with intricate incised designs, would inhale the powder through a double tube, one end in each nostril, or from a special spoon. The effects were rapid and intense. Visions of zemis speaking, houses spinning, ancestors appearing, prophecies unfolding. The behique might diagnose illnesses, foresee raids, interpret dreams, or commune with Yúcahu for guidance on planting or war. Chroniclers like Ramon Panay, a Catalan friar sent by Columbus to live among the Taíno in 1494–1498, described these rites in detail. Participants would rave, speak in tongues, and emerge with revelations. Panay's account of the antiquities of the Indians, relayed through Ferdinand Columbus and Peter Martyr d'Anghiera, remains one of the most direct sources on Taíno beliefs, preserving myths, rituals, and zemi lore before suppression. Daily life pulsed with this spirituality. A farmer might bury a small zemi in his conuco before sowing cassava, whispering thanks to Yúcahu. A mother would invoke Atabey during childbirth. Fishermen offered tobacco smoke to see spirits before launching canoes. Illness was seen as imbalance, perhaps a zemi offended or a soul lost, treated by behiks with herbs from a vast pharmacopoeia including guaiacum for syphilis-like ailments, tobacco poultices, and cohoba for visions revealing causes, massage, purging, and chants. Death rituals involved wrapping the body in cotton, burying with goods, or in caves for caciques. Souls journeyed to Coibe, sometimes returning as bats or owls. This rich inner world sustained a society that, as Spanish observers noted with astonishment, required little labor for abundance. Conucos, mounds up to 3 feet high, enriched with manure, leaves, and ash, yielded cassava year-round with minimal weeding. Women processed roots into cassave on burins griddles, preserving it for months. Men built canoes from single ceiba trunks, some 6,100 feet long, carrying dozens for trade or voyages between islands. Trade networks exchanged cotton, gold nuggets, ornamental, parrots, shells, and pottery across the Antilles. Yet this harmony shattered under encomienda. The system, formalized in the laws of Burgos 1512, entrusted groups of Taíno to Spanish encomenderos for labor in exchange for supposed Christian instruction and protection. In reality, it became perpetual servitude. Taíno were relocated to reductions near mines or farms, tearing them from ancestral lands and conucos. Men panned gold until exhaustion, women spun cotton or ground meal under guard. Quotas escalated, punishments brutal, amputations, burnings, hangings for resistance. Las Casas, once an encomendero himself, described horrors. Spaniards betting on who could cleave a Taíno in two with a sword, feeding live Indians to dogs, mass rapes, villages razed for failing tribute. In one massacre at Cayano, Spaniards slaughtered hundreds during a feast. Famine followed disrupted agriculture, diseases compounded despair. Population estimates vary. Las Casas claimed millions on Hispaniola. Modern archaeology and genetics suggest 100,000 to 500,000 island-wide pre-contact, with effective breeding populations smaller, but decline was swift, from hundreds of thousands to under 30,000 by 1514, near zero in records by 1550s. Survival strategies varied. Some fled to mountains, forming palinks, runaway communities that blended with later African Maroons. Intermarriage produced mestizos carrying Taíno mtDNA, maternal lines dominant in modern Caribbean populations, up to 1061% in Puerto Rico per studies. Cultural elements persisted underground, herbal cures in curanderismo, hammocks and cassave in rural life, words in Spanish dialects. The modern Taíno movement, emerging in the 1970s-1990s, reclaims this heritage. In Puerto Rico, groups like the United Confederation of Taíno People and Jatabanuku Taíno Tribal Nation hold ceremonies, rebuild deities, teach reconstructed language from colonial vocabularies, carve zemis, grow cassava traditionally. Dominican revivalists in Cibao perform syncretic rituals blending Taíno, Catholic, African elements. Cuban Eastern communities document survivals in folklore and genetics. DNA evidence confirms indigenous ancestry. Cultural festivals celebrate areytos, petroglyph-inspired art. Critics question authenticity, but participants see it as ethnogenesis, living heritage reborn through mestizage. They challenge extinction narratives used to justify dispossession, asserting Taíno contributions to Caribbean identity. Foods: cassava, maize, words: barbacoa, canoe, resilience. The Taíno story is unfinished. From pre-1492 abundance to post-contact devastation, through hidden persistence to contemporary revival, it speaks of loss and endurance. In a modern deity, drums echo ancient rhythms, voices sing of Yúcahu and Atabey. The zemis, once hidden, stand visible again. The people Columbus met did not vanish, they transformed, and their spirit endures in the island's soil, sea, and blood. As trade winds carry songs across the same shores, the Taíno legacy reminds us, worlds collide but roots run deep. What was taken can be reclaimed, what was silenced can speak once more. To truly grasp the scale and depth of the Taíno experience, both the luminous beauty of their pre-contact world and the shattering force of what followed, we need to linger longer on the intricate layers of their daily existence, spiritual practices, social structures, and the slow, painful ways those elements fractured and yet persisted. This extended reflection will carry us deeper into the heart of Taíno life, drawing from archaeological findings, the rare eyewitness accounts that survived colonial censorship, and the echoes that resonate in modern Caribbean cultures. We will move methodically, letting the details unfold like the slow rhythm of an areyto itself, so the listener can feel the texture of that lost yet enduring world. Let us begin again with the physical landscape the Taíno inhabited, because place shaped everything. The Greater Antilles are not uniform. Each island has its own character, yet all share the tropical abundance that made large populations possible without intensive state coercion. Hispaniola, today shared by Haiti and the Dominican Republic, was the most populous and politically complex. Its central mountain ranges, the Cordillera Central, rise to over 10,000 feet, creating diverse microclimates. Humid coastal plains for fishing and root crops, fertile valleys for maize and beans, cooler highlands where cooler air allowed different plants. Puerto Rico Boricane offered rolling hills and karst limestone formations riddled with caves, sacred sites where bones of ancestors and zemis were placed. Jamaica Zaymaca had broad river valleys and rugged blue mountains, ideal for cassava but also for refuge in later centuries. Eastern Cuba featured mangrove coasts and pine forests, while the Bahamas, Luquios, were low, flat coral islands with limited freshwater but rich in conch and fish. Villages were strategically placed, near rivers or coasts for water and protein, on elevated ground for defense and breeze, surrounded by conucos that radiated outward like spokes from a wheel. A large yucayeques might cover several acres, with 5,200 bohios arranged in a loose circle around the central deity. Bohios averaged 15-30 feet in diameter, their thatched roofs steeply pitched to 20-30 feet high, allowing smoke to rise and rain to run off. Walls were wattle and daub or woven palm, often decorated with red and black geometric patterns. Inside, hammocks hung in tiers, storage baskets held cassava, dried fish, cotton thread. Floors were packed earth, sometimes plastered with clay. The deity itself was the soul of the community, oval or circular, leveled and swept clean, sometimes edged with low stone walls or posts. Here ball games took place. Teams of 10-20 players struck a solid rubber ball made from tree latex with hips, shoulders, elbows, never hands, aiming to keep it in play or pass through goals. The game blended sport, ritual, gambling with cotton or shells as stakes, and diplomacy. Caciques sometimes settled disputes through matches. Spectators lined the edges, chanting encouragement, while behiques watched for omens. Social organization reflected matrilineal principles. A child belonged to the mother's clan. Land and chiefly titles passed through women. This gave females considerable influence. They controlled agriculture, the economic base, selected marriage partners for children, and could inherit caciqueship if no suitable male heir existed. Caciques like Anacayana, sister of Cayanabo, ruler of Zaragua in southern Hispaniola, exemplified female leadership. She was renowned for her beauty, intelligence, and diplomatic skill, hosting grand areytos attended by hundreds. Nobles Taínos assisted caciques in administration and war. They wore larger gold nose rings, feathered headdresses, and cotton mantles dyed with plant extracts. Commoners, Naborias, formed the majority, contributing labor through communal work parties, conuqueros for planting, fishermen for group hauls. Captives from Carib raids or internal conflicts sometimes served as laborers, but the system lacked hereditary chattel slavery. Captives could integrate over time. Daily routines followed seasonal and lunar cycles. Dry season December-April brought clear skies for fishing and long-distance canoe voyages. Wet season May-November focused on planting and weeding. Dawn saw men launching canoes or heading to fields. Women grated cassava, baked cassave, wove cotton into nets or belts. Midday heat meant rest in shade or hammocks. Evenings brought storytelling, music, games. Children learned by imitation, boys practiced archery with miniature bows, girls helped process roots or cared for younger siblings. Elders respected for wisdom, supervised rituals, and arbitrated quarrels. Food was varied and nutritious. Cassava provided carbohydrates, sweet potatoes, maize, beans offered variety. Protein came from fish, snapper, parrotfish, shark, shellfish, conch, oysters, hutia, a large rodent hunted with dogs, iguanas, birds, parrots, doves. Fruits included guava, mamey, pineapple, anana, and taíno, papaya. Seasonings featured ají peppers, annatto for color and flavor. Meals were communal, food shared from large platters in the deity or family bohios. Artistry appeared in everyday objects. Pottery, often red, slipped with incised swirls, animal effigies, or anthropomorphic faces, served cooking, storage, burial urns. Petroglyphs carved into boulders near rivers or caves depicted zemis, frogs, symbols of fertility, spirals, perhaps cosmic cycles. Cotton weaving produced intricate belts, armbands, hammocks. Featherwork adorned chiefly regalia. Goldworking was minimal but elegant, nuggets hammered into thin sheets for nose ornaments, ear spools, lip plugs. Spirituality permeated these creations. A duho stool might feature a crouching frog linked to Atabey, its eyes inlaid with shell. A zemi idol, three-pointed for Yúcahu, anthropomorphic for ancestors, received offerings of tobacco, food, or blood from self-inflicted wounds during intense rituals. Caves served as natural temples. Many in Puerto Rico and Dominican Republic contain petroglyphs and skeletal remains, suggesting they were sites for ancestor veneration or initiation rites. Ramon Panay's account, the only extended pre-suppression ethnography, details zemi rituals vividly. He describes how Behiks consulted idols by placing them in special houses, offering food, and interpreting movements or sounds as answers. In one rite, a cacique would fast, then inhale cohoba while others sang. The Behik would emerge trembling, declaring the zemi's will, perhaps to plant more cassava or prepare for Carib raids. Caribs, seafaring raiders from the Lesser Antilles, posed the main external threat. They captured Taíno for food or wives. Cannibalism was ritualistic, not nutritional, aimed at absorbing enemy strength. Taíno villages built palisades in exposed areas. Warriors used macanas, bows, poisoned arrows. Yet relations were not always hostile. Trade occurred and some intermarriage took place. This balanced world, abundant, spiritual, communal, faced existential rupture after 1492. Initial hospitality gave way to exploitation as gold lust grew. Columbus's 1495 tribute system morphed into encomienda, legalized in 1503 and regulated in 1512. Taíno labor built Spanish towns. Santo Domingo, founded 1496, mined gold in Cibao streams, planted European crops. Overwork, malnutrition, despair accelerated disease mortality. Specific atrocities fill chronicles. In 1503, Governor Nicolás de Ovando massacred Anacaona and dozens of caciques at a feast in Zaragua, invited under truce, then ambushed, leaders hanged, others burned alive. Anacaona was garroted after imprisonment. In Puerto Rico, Juan Ponce de León, 1510s, used dogs and fire to subdue resistance. Cuba's Hadui, a cacique who fled Hispaniola, led guerrilla warfare before capture and burning at the stake in 1512. Legend says he rejected baptism, preferring hell with his people over heaven with Spaniards. Las Casas' devastation of the Indies catalogs patterns: forced marches to mines, families separated, women worked until collapse, children orphaned and enslaved. He estimated 3–4 million deaths across islands, likely overstated but directionally accurate for scale of catastrophe. Yet survival threads persisted. In Jamaica, Taíno remnants fled to Cockpit Country mountains, blending with later Maroons. In Puerto Rico, highland communities maintained cassava farming and oral lore into 1600s. Dominican Indios appear in colonial censuses as late as 1700s, often as laborers or in missions. Genetic legacy is undeniable. Mitochondrial DNA studies, 2000s-2020s, show Taíno maternal ancestry in 10–30% of Puerto Ricans, up to 20% Dominicans, lower but present in Cubans. Autosomal DNA confirms admixture. This proves biological continuity despite cultural suppression. Cultural echoes abound. Casabe remains a Dominican/Puerto Rican staple prepared traditionally. Hammocks are universal in rural Caribbean. Tobacco smoking rituals evolved into cigars. Place names Haiti from Haiti, mountainous land, Borinquin from Boricane endure. Herbal medicine preserves Taíno plant knowledge. Soursop for cancer claims, Cerezy for diabetes. The contemporary movement crystallized in the late 20th century. In 1998, the United Confederation of Taíno People formed, uniting groups across islands. They petition for UN recognition, lobby museums for repatriation of zemis and remains. The Jadabanaku tribe in Puerto Rico holds annual areytos, teaches language reconstructed from Panay, Las Casas dictionaries, words like ana equals flower, Boricán equals land of valiant lords. Dominican groups in San Juan de la Maguana revive deity ceremonies, blending with Vodou influences. In Cuba, Eastern Baracoa communities document petroglyphs and oral histories. Festivals feature Taíno-inspired music, dance, food. Artists create modern zemis from recycled materials, symbolizing adaptation. Critics debate invention. No unbroken line of pure tradition exists, but participants frame it as cultural reclamation, akin to other indigenous revivals, e.g., Maori Native American. It asserts presence against erasure narratives that facilitated land grabs and marginalization. This extended journey through Taíno life, from conuco to cohoba, deity to revival, reveals a people of profound ingenuity and spiritual depth, subjected to one of history's swiftest demographic collapses, yet whose essence persists in blood, language, land, and renewed voices. Their story is a testament. Cultures can be wounded deeply, but never fully extinguished when memory and resilience endure. As night falls over a Caribbean hill where a small group gathers around a fire, drums begin a slow beat. A voice rises, singing of Atabey and Yúcahu, of ancestors who welcomed strangers and suffered unimaginable loss. The circle sways. Zemis carved a new watch from the shadows. The Taíno world breathes again, not as it was, but as it can be. The threads of Taíno survival and revival deserve even greater space because they reveal something profound about human cultures. They are rarely erased completely, even by the most violent forces. Instead, they fragment, hide, recombine, and re-emerge in forms that colonial powers often failed to recognize or deliberately refused to acknowledge. Let us expand this exploration slowly and thoroughly, layer by layer, through the centuries after the catastrophic decline, tracing how Taíno elements persisted in everyday life, in blended identities, in resistance communities, in folklore, in language, in agriculture, in spirituality, and finally in the organized cultural and political movements of the late 20th and early 21st centuries. This long arc will help illustrate why so many people today feel a living connection to the Taíno, even when official histories declared them gone. Immediately after the demographic nadir in the mid-16th century, when colonial records on Hispaniola, Puerto Rico, Jamaica, and eastern Cuba listed only scattered dozens or hundreds of indios, rather than the vibrant societies of old, the Taíno did not vanish into nothingness. They entered a phase historians sometimes call ethnogenesis under duress, or stealth survival. On paper, in censuses and tribute rolls, they disappeared because being classified as Indio meant heavier taxes, forced labor, or worse. Many therefore became officially mestizo, mixed Spanish indigenous, mulatto, mixed African indigenous, or simply vecino, neighbor resident, to escape the encomienda and repartimiento systems. Yet this reclassification did not erase ancestry or memory, it masked it. In rural areas far from Spanish administrative centers, deep in the Bajoruco mountains of southern Hispaniola, the central Cordillera, the karst hills of Puerto Rico's interior, the cockpit country of Jamaica, the Sierra Maestra of Cuba, Small clusters of families continued practices that traced directly to pre-1492 life. Cassava remained the cornerstone crop. Women still grated roots on stone metates, borrowed term from Taíno metate, squeezed poison in woven tapitis, the long cylindrical press baskets, and baked cassave on flat burens. The technique was unchanged, only the context shifted, now sometimes grown in secret plots to avoid tribute collectors. Conuco-style raised mounds persisted in many peasant fields because they worked better in tropical rains than flat European-style plowing. Hammocks, hamacas, stayed ubiquitous. Every bohio-style hut, now often called bohio in Dominican and Puerto Rican Spanish, had them strung between posts for sleeping, resting, or even birthing. The word and object survived intact because they were practical. No Spanish bed could compete with the cool, insect-resistant, space-saving hammock in humid climates. Fishing weirs, nets, and dugout canoes, canoas, continued along coasts and rivers, built with the same adze and fire-hollowing methods. Tobacco was smoked, chewed, or used in poultices exactly as before, even as Catholic priests condemned it as devilish. Oral traditions adapted. Areytos as large communal dances became risky under missionary surveillance, but fragments lived on in smaller family gatherings. A grandmother might sing a fragment of an old chiefly genealogy while rocking a child in a hammock, or whisper stories of Yúcahu and Atabey to grandchildren at bedtime, recast sometimes as tales of Santos or nature spirits to avoid suspicion. Zemis went underground, literally. Small wooden or stone idols were buried under house floors, hidden in caves, or disguised as Christian icons. A three-pointed Yúcahu stone might be placed beneath an altar to the Virgin Mary, merging old and new reverence in syncretic fashion. Intermarriage accelerated blending. Spanish men, often soldiers, miners, or impoverished settlers, took Taíno women as partners, sometimes consensually in early years, often coercively later. African men and women, imported as slaves from the 1500s onward to fill labor gaps, also formed unions with surviving Taíno and mestizo populations, especially in remote areas where escape was possible. These triracial families, indigenous, European, African, became the demographic foundation of much of the modern Caribbean peasantry. Mitochondrial DNA, passed only through mothers, shows Taíno maternal lines dominating in many families. Studies from 2010-2024 consistently find a 35% indigenous ancestry in Puerto Rican, Dominican, and Eastern Cuban populations, with Puerto Rico often at the higher end. In these blended households, cultural transmission favored maternal knowledge, food preparation, herbal remedies, child-rearing practices, weaving, storytelling. A child might grow up eating cassave and aji-seasoned fish, sleeping in a hamaca, hearing lullabies with Taíno root words, learning which leaves cured fevers, all without ever hearing the word Taíno spoken aloud. The identity label faded, but the lifeways did not. Maroon communities, Cimarron or Quilombo settlements became crucial refuges. From the 1520s onward, escaped Africans and indigenous people formed autonomous villages in inaccessible terrain. In Hispaniola, Bahoruco Maroons included Taíno descendants who taught cassava farming and cohoba preparation to newcomers. In Jamaica, the Windward and Leeward Maroons preserved elements like herbal baths and spirit communication that echoed Taíno Bahique practices, blended with West African traditions. Puerto Rican highlands sheltered similar groups. Oral histories there speak of Los Indios de la Montaña, who helped runaways. These communities often raided plantations for tools and food, but also traded secretly with coastal peasants, spreading Taíno-influenced agriculture and crafts. By the 17th and 18th centuries, as the islands shifted toward large-scale sugar plantations, the remaining Indios often appeared in records as free peasants, small farmers, or laborers in towns. In Puerto Rico, the 1770s-1800s census categories sometimes listed Indios in isolated barrios, Dominican church records noted Indios marrying or being buried into the 1700s. In Cuba, eastern regions like Baracoa and Yataras retained identifiable indigenous descended families who self-identified as Indios or Monteses, mountain people, well into the 19th century. Folklore collected in the 19th and early 20th centuries preserves clear Taíno traces. Dominican cuentos feature nature spirits, cave-dwelling ancestors, and magical cassava origins. Puerto Rican Jibaro peasant tales include the Siguapa, a wild, backward-footed woman of the mountains, widely interpreted by folklorists as a transformed memory of Taíno forest guardians or female zemis. Cuban rural stories mention Juans or forest beings linked to pre-Hispanic lore. Place names, rivers called Yak, Toa, Kama carry Taíno etymology. Food names yuca, batata, maize, guineo for banana-like plantain, and cooking methods stayed embedded in Criollo cuisine. The 19th century independence movement sometimes invoked indigenous heritage symbolically. In the Dominican Republic, Juan Pablo Duarte and early nationalists referenced the Taíno as original owners of the land to legitimize separation from Haiti and Spain. In Puerto Rico, the 1868 Grito de Lares uprising included rhetoric about returning to Boricuan roots. Yet actual Taíno cultural practice remained folk-level, not organized revival. The true resurgence began in the mid-20th century, fueled by several converging forces. Rising indigenous consciousness across the Americas, inspired by movements in Mexico, Guatemala, Bolivia, anthropological rediscovery of pre-Columbian Caribbean societies, archaeological excavations uncovering villages and zemis, DNA science revealing genetic continuity, and local intellectuals seeking non-European roots amid decolonization debates. Key milestones: 1970s, 1980s. Small cultural groups in Puerto Rico began researching Taíno heritage through libraries, museums, and elders. Roberto Mucarzal and others collected oral histories from rural families claiming indigenous descent. 1990s, formation of formal organizations. The Jatabanuku Taíno tribal nation of Boricuan registered in 1994-1995, emphasizing descent from the Jatabanuku cacique line. The United Confederation of Taíno People, UCTP, founded 1998 by Roberto Borrero and others, united groups from Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, Cuba, and diaspora communities in the U.S. They created a flag, white with sun symbol and coqui frog, issued identification cards, and advocated for recognition. 2000s DNA publications, e.g., Martinez Cruzado 2005 study showing high Taíno mtDNA in Puerto Rico provided scientific backing. Community gardens growing traditional crops appeared. Language revival efforts compiled dictionaries from colonial sources, Panay, Las Casas, Oviedo, teaching basic words and phrases. 2010s, 2020s, growth accelerated. Annual Taíno festivals in Boricuan feature areytos with drums, maracas, singing, and dance circles. Zemi carving workshops use ceiba wood and stone. Petroglyph-inspired jewelry and pottery sold at markets. In the Dominican Republic, the Taíno Legacy Foundation and local groups in San Juan de la Maguana hold ceremonies at Beatty reconstructions. Cuba's indigenous communities in Baracoa organize cultural days with traditional foods and stories. Contemporary practice blends old and new. A modern areyto might include electric guitars alongside Mayohuacan drums, prayers to Atabey alongside Catholic elements, or references to climate change as a new Juracan. Zemis are sometimes made from sustainable materials or recycled items, symbolizing adaptation. Activists push for repatriation of artifacts from museums in Spain, the US, and Europe. Some zemis have been returned to communities. Debates continue. Some scholars and indigenous leaders from mainland groups question the Taíno revival because no continuous institutional lineage exists like in the Andes or Mesoamerica. Others argue it is a legitimate form of cultural resurgence, parallel to Hawaiian, Maori, or Métis revivals, identities reborn through conscious effort after suppression. Politically, groups seek federal recognition in Puerto Rico, similar to U.S. tribes, land rights discussions, inclusion in school curricula, and acknowledgement in national identities. They challenge Columbus Day celebrations, advocate for renaming places, and highlight Taíno contributions to global agriculture. Cassava feeds hundreds of millions worldwide. In everyday life, the revival touches ordinary people. A Puerto Rican family might hang a coqui-shaped ornament, grow yucca in a backyard conuco-style plot, or learn an areyto song from YouTube. A Dominican artist paints murals of Anacaona or Cayanabo. A Cuban child in Baracoa learns that her great-grandmother spoke La Lengua Vieja. This long persistence, from hidden bohíos in the 1500s to beities lit by solar lamps in the 2020s, shows the Taíno world never truly ended. It bent, hid, blended, and now straightens again in new forms. The people Columbus met with curiosity and gifts adapted to a cataclysm no prophecy prepared them for, yet their ingenuity, spirituality, and generosity echo still, in the rustle of palm fronds, the taste of fresh cassabe, the beat of a drum under Caribbean stars. As we close this extended reflection, imagine standing in a mountain clearing today. Smoke rises from a fire where cassabe bakes on a burin. Voices chant in a language half remembered, half reborn. Children run laughing, painted with red acciati dots. A carved zemis rests on a stone altar, catching moonlight. The past and present meet here not as museum pieces, but as living breath. Now that we have walked through the long shadow of survival, the hidden bohíos, the syncretic altars, the genetic whispers, the revived drums, let us turn our gaze toward a broader horizon. This final extended chapter will weave together the loose ends of the Taíno narrative. Reflections on what their story teaches us about contact between worlds, the nature of cultural resilience, the ongoing debates in scholarship and identity politics, comparisons with other indigenous experiences across the Americas, the role of archaeology in rediscovery, the global ripples of Taíno contributions, and a meditative close that returns us to the calm, immersive spirit of history for sleep. We will linger here, letting the details breathe slowly, so the listener can absorb the quiet power of a people who, against all odds, refused complete erasure. First, consider the deeper lessons embedded in the collision of 1492. The Taíno encounter with Europeans was not merely a clash of technologies, wooden canoes versus caravels, stone tools versus steel, but a profound mismatch of worldviews. The Taíno lived in cyclical time, seasons, lunar phases, ancestral returns through zemis. History was not linear progress toward domination, but balance maintained through reciprocity with land, sea, and spirits. Columbus and his successors operated in linear, accumulative time: conquest, extraction, conversion, empire building. Gold was not adornment but capital, land not communal gift but private property, people not kin but labor units. This fundamental incompatibility fueled the tragedy. Hospitality met greed, generosity met quotas, spiritual communion met forced baptism. The Taíno offered food, gold, trinkets, guidance. In return they received disease, chains, and erasure. Yet within that asymmetry lies a paradox. The very openness that invited catastrophe also enabled survival. The Taíno willingness to integrate through trade, marriage, cultural exchange, created pathways for elements of their world to embed in the new Creole societies. Cassava became the bread of the poor across the tropics. Hammocks cooled colonial verandas. Tobacco fueled global habits. What was taken violently was also quietly adopted, spreading Taíno influence far beyond the Antilles. Today, billions eat foods domesticated or refined by indigenous Americans, including Taíno staples. The Colombian exchange flowed both ways, but the indigenous side carried forward in subtle, enduring forms. Compare this to other indigenous trajectories in the Americas. In the Andes, Inca descendants maintained clearer institutional continuity. Ayllus, Quechua language strongholds, visible resistance like Tupac Amaru. In Mesoamerica, Maya and Nahua communities preserved codices, calendars, languages despite conquest. Mainland groups often had denser populations, monumental architecture, writing systems that aided continuity. The Caribbean islands, smaller and more isolated, faced swifter demographic collapse. Disease hit harder in dense villages with no prior exposure, and Encomienda dismantled societies faster without vast hinterlands for flight. Yet the Taíno case parallels smaller, indigenous survivals. The Garifuna blending Arawak, African, Carib, the Lumbee of North Carolina, or the Métis of Canada, groups that reformed identity through admixture and adaptation, often unrecognized until recent decades. Archaeology has been crucial in challenging the extinction myth. Since the 1980s, excavations at sites like Enbaz Saline, Haiti, a large late-period village, Mesable, Puerto Rico, and El Bronce, Puerto Rico, have uncovered house patterns, conucos traces, zemis fragments, petroglyphs, burial caves with offerings. Pottery styles show continuity into colonial periods, European forms mixed with Taíno incisions. DNA from ancient remains, e.g., 2018-2023 studies on pre- and post-contact skeletons, confirms maternal lineages persisting. These findings fuel revival. Repatriated bones and artifacts returned to communities for reburial or display, strengthening claims to heritage. Scholarly debates remain lively. Some Caribbean historians, e.g., Jalal Sud-Badillo, Roberto Cassà, emphasize near-total demographic and cultural rupture, viewing modern claims as romantic reconstruction. Others, Lynn Guitar, José Barrero, Jorge Duany, highlight continuity through mestizage, arguing extinction served colonial land claims by declaring no living heirs. Indigenous scholars and activists counter that authenticity need not require unbroken purity. Cultures evolve. The Taíno revival mirrors global decolonization, reclaiming suppressed histories to heal intergenerational trauma, assert rights, counter Eurocentric narratives. Globally, Taíno legacies ripple outward. Cassava manioc spread via Portuguese traders to Africa, Asia, Pacific, now a staple for 800 million people. Tobacco transformed economies and rituals worldwide. Words like barbecue, barbacoa equals Taíno frame for roasting, hurricane, huracan, canoe, potato, batata variant, maize entered dozens of languages. In music and art, Taíno motifs appear in salsa rhythms echoing areyto percussion, Dominican merengue, Puerto Rican bamba/plena, blending African Taíno Spanish. Literature, poets like Julia de Burgos invoked Boricane spirit, novelists explore mestizo identity. In popular culture, Taíno symbols gain visibility, coqui frog as Puerto Rican icon, zemi designs in tattoos, street art depicting Anacaona or Hadui. Educational curricula in Puerto Rico and Dominican Republic increasingly include Taíno units beyond Columbus myth. Museums, Smithsonian Caribbean, Museo del Indio in Puerto Rico, feature Taíno exhibits with community input. For those listening as sleep approaches, reflect on this gentle truth: history is not a closed book. The Taíno world, its laughter in the Beatty, its prayers to Atabey, its hands shaping cassava, did not end on a calendar date. It flows like island rivers into the sea of today. In a child's hammock nap, a grandmother's herbal tea, a festival drumbeat, a DNA match notification, a carved zemi catching dawn light. Picture now the quiet Caribbean night. Waves lap white sand where canoes once landed to greet strangers. Palm fronds rustle overhead. Somewhere in the hills a small fire glows. Voices rise softly, not in lament but in continuation. A song begins, old words, new harmonies. The zemis listen. Ancestors smile from the stars. The story breathes on. Before we allow the gentle rhythm of the narrative to carry us fully into rest, there remains one more deep layer to explore, one that often remains in shadow even among those who study or feel connected to the Taíno story. This is the intimate, almost invisible realm of everyday emotions, personal names, family memories, childhood games, courtship customs, mourning practices, dreams, fears, and small private joys that once filled the bohios and beities. History for sleep thrives when we slow down enough to feel the human texture beneath grand events. So tonight we will linger here longer than before, walking quietly through the inner lives of ordinary Taíno people in the centuries before contact, during the first shattering decades, and in the long, quiet aftermath when survival became an art of discretion. Imagine waking at first light in a coastal yucayeques on what Europeans would later call Hispaniola, perhaps near the place now known as Monte Cristi. The air carries salt, wet earth, blooming frangipani. A child, let us call her Yara, a common Taíno name meaning small butterfly or water lady in different regional usages, stirs in her hammock. She is perhaps 8 summers old. Her mother, a skilled weaver named Koabai, beautiful one, is already outside scraping cassava roots with a shelled tool, humming a soft fragment of an old areyto melody that tells of how the first cassava came from the bones of a boy transformed by the zemis. Yara slips from the hammock, bare feet touching cool, packed earth. She runs to join other children near the beatty edge. Their morning game is simple yet rich with meaning. They chase one another in circles, mimicking the flight of sea birds or the swirl of river currents, laughing when someone trips into the soft sand. One boy, Mabai, pretends to be Guabinsek sending storms, the others scatter, shrieking with delight and mock terror. These games are never just play, they train agility, teach respect for natural forces, reinforce communal bonds. No child is excluded, even the shyest is gently pulled into the circle. Nearby, an elder named Garakuya sits on a low stool carving a small wooden zemi for his granddaughter's coming-of-age ceremony. His hands move with deliberate slowness, the knife following lines he has traced in his mind for decades. He murmurs to the wood as he works, addressing the spirit he hopes will inhabit the figure. "Come gently, little guardian," he says. "Protect this girl as Atabey protects the rivers." Such private conversations with materials were common, everything held potential life. As the sun climbs, adults gather for the day's labor. Men paddle out in canoes to check fish weirs or cast nets. Women head to conucos with digging sticks and baskets. Koabai shows Yara how to mound soil properly, kneading it with hands and feet until it feels alive and willing. They plant cassava cuttings, pressing each into the earth with a whispered thanks to Yúcahu. Planting is meditative work. The body moves in rhythm with breath, with waves heard in the distance. There is no overseer, no quota hanging like a blade. Time belongs to the task and the season. Midday brings communal eating under palm shade. Kassabe is torn into pieces, dipped in peppered fish broth or guava paste. Someone tells a joke about a lazy Husha who tried to outrun a hunter. Laughter ripples outward. Stories flow easily, how the moon once had a jealous husband who beat her until she hid her face, explaining the phases, how the first people learned to make fire from the zemi of lightning. Children listen wide-eyed, absorbing not just facts but moral shape, share, respect elders, honor the balance. Afternoon heat quiets the village. Hammocks sway, some nap, others weave cotton or repair nets. Koabai teaches Yara to spin thread on a drop spindle, singing a work song whose words praise Atabey for strong fibers and steady hands. Courtship happens in these quiet hours too. Young men and women exchange glances across the beatty during ball games or areytos. Gifts are subtle, a perfect conch shell, a feather dyed bright red, a woven armband. Marriage was arranged by families but required the young people's consent. Refusal was respected, though gentle pressure might be applied for alliance reasons. Evenings belong to the fire and the circle. When the moon is full, an areyto is called. Drums pulse low at first, building slowly. Voices join deep male tones carrying the narrative verses, higher women's voices weaving harmony and refrain. Bodies move in unison, step, sway, turn, clap. Sweat glistens in torchlight. For a few hours, the boundary between human and spirit thins. Ancestors seem close enough to touch. A bahik might enter trance, eyes rolling, body trembling, speaking prophecies or healing words. The community listens in reverent silence, then erupts in song again. Mourning was equally communal and tender. When someone died, the body was washed, painted with red anato, wrapped in fresh cotton. Family and friends gathered to sing laments, long, keening areytos that recounted the deceased's deeds, kindnesses, lineage. Food was prepared in abundance. Neighbors brought cassava bread, smoked fish, fruits. The body might be buried beneath the bohio floor so the spirit stayed near family, or placed in a cave with zemis and offerings. Widows or widowers observed periods of seclusion, fasting, painting their bodies black. Grief was given space and time. No one was expected to move on quickly. Dreams held great weight. A vivid dream of a zemi speaking or an ancestor appearing was shared with the bahik the next morning. Interpretation guided decisions: when to plant, whether to undertake a voyage, how to heal an illness. Night fears were soothed by protective zemis placed near sleeping hammocks or small offerings of tobacco smoke. These intimate rhythms, small, repeated, deeply felt, formed the true substance of Taíno life. Grand events, chiefly successions, carob raids, major harvests, punctuated them, but the daily texture was gentle, relational, spiritually saturated. Then came the ships. For Yara's generation, the change arrived without warning. Strange men in heavy clothes stepped ashore. At first wonder dominated, their pale skin metal that shone, beards like strange moss. Gifts were exchanged, parrots for bells, cotton for glass beads. Yara might have run forward with other children, laughing, touching the edges of their tunics. Her mother watched warily but offered kasab. Within months the mood shifted, demands grew sharper. Men were taken to pan rivers, women ordered to spin endless cotton. When quotas failed, punishments followed: public floggings, ears sliced, hands severed as warnings. Yara saw her uncle Mabai return from the river camp with lash scars crisscrossing his back, eyes hollow. Her mother whispered at night, "Hide the small zemi under the floor, speak only when spoken to." Disease struck next. A fever swept the yucayeques. Children burned, then shivered, then lay still. Yara's baby brother died in Koabai's arms. Neighbors vanished overnight. The deity, once loud with play and song, grew silent except for coughing and lament. Bahiks tried Kohoba visions, but the spirit seemed far away or angry. Resistance flickered in private ways. Koabai taught Yara to memorize areyto fragments in secret, whispering them only when alone. They buried favorite zemis deep in the forest. When Spanish overseers came, the family smiled, bowed heads, complied outwardly while preserving inwardly. Many did not survive the first generation. Yara herself might have perished from smallpox or starvation, but suppose she lived, fled with a few relatives to high mountains, joining others in hidden clearings. There in makeshift bohios, the old ways continued in miniature. Cassava was planted in small conucos, stories told in hushed voices, children taught to weave, to fish, to recognize medicinal leaves. Marriage happened within the group or with escaped Africans who brought new strength and songs. Over generations, these mountain families blended. Taíno names became Spanish surnames. Many Dominicans and Puerto Ricans carry surnames like Calan, Guerrero, or indigenous-derived ones like Mabai, Koabai, yet maternal lines carried forward. Grandmothers still grated cassava the old way, still hung protective charms, now sometimes disguised as Catholic medals. A child might be told, "Your great-grandmother spoke the old language when she was angry." The knowledge stayed fragmented but alive. By the 1700s, 1800s, descendants lived as peasants, jibaros in Puerto Rico, campesinos in the Dominican Republic, growing subsistence crops, raising chickens, a post-contact addition, attending mass while privately honoring older spirits. A woman preparing kasab might instinctively make the sign of the cross over the burin, merging Atabey's blessing with Christian ritual. In the 20th century, as radio, roads, and schools reached remote areas, some families began to speak openly of Indio roots. Grandparents showed grandchildren petroglyph rubbings, old stone tools found in fields, or a wooden figure kept wrapped in cloth. DNA tests in the 2010s, 2020s often brought tears. See, the ancestors never left. Today, a woman in a rural Dominican village might rise at dawn, tend her conuco exactly as her Taíno foremothers did, then post a photo of fresh kasab on social media with the caption, "Hirncha Taíno." A young man in Boracay learns to carve zemis from online tutorials and his grandfather's stories. A child in New York, third-generation diaspora, dances in a cultural festival wearing red anato dots, feeling for a moment the deity pulse through her. We go deeper still into the shadowed interior of memory itself, where fragments of Taíno consciousness persist not as grand narratives but as fleeting impressions, half-remembered sensations, unexplained affinities that surface in dreams, in sudden tears at the sight of a certain leaf, in the inexplicable comfort found in the smell of wet earth after rain. This layer is the most fragile and perhaps the most enduring, the subconscious inheritance that defies documentation, the quiet ways the ancestors continue to speak through bodies that no longer know their names. Consider how trauma embeds in the nervous system. The first generations after contact lived with constant hypervigilance. Every rustle in the brush could be a Spanish patrol or their hunting dogs. Every new fever in a child carried the terror of extinction. Cortisol levels stayed elevated for lifetimes. Sleep came shallow, interrupted by nightmares of burning bohíos or chained relatives. Yet alongside fear came micro acts of reclamation. A mother singing a wordless lullaby whose melody traced an ancient areyto contour, soothing not just the infant but her own racing heart. A father teaching his son to paddle with the exact stroke his own father used, the motion becoming a ritual of defiance. This is how we move on water, how we always have. These embodied transmissions passed sideways and downward. A girl who never heard the word behik might still instinctively place a small stone under her pillow for protection, mirroring the placement of protective zemis. A boy running through fields might pause to press his palm to a ceiba trunk, the same sacred tree his ancestors addressed as living kin, feeling an unnameable recognition. In blended families, African spiritual practices sometimes resonated with Taíno ones. The use of tobacco in offerings, rhythmic drumming to call spirits, herbal baths for cleansing. Syncretism happened in the body first, through shared gestures, shared smells of incense and crushed leaves, before it reached conscious thought. By the 18th and 19th centuries, as colonial society stratified into castes, Españoles, mestizos, mulattoes, negros, Taíno descent often hid in the middle layers. A family might self-identify as Blanco del País, white of the country, or simply campesino, yet preserve distinct habits, aversion to certain foods introduced by Spaniards, preference for root crops over wheat bread, a habit of sleeping in hammocks even when beds were available. Oral lore condensed into proverbs or dichos. No despiertes al huracán, don't wake the hurricane, a warning against anger that echoed Guabansex's wrath. Stories of La Siguapa, the wild mountain woman with backward feet, served as cautionary tales for children straying too far, but also as symbolic memory of women who fled into the hills rather than submit. In the 20th century, modernization, roads, electricity, migration to cities threatened even these faint traces, yet paradoxically, it also enabled rediscovery. Rural to urban migrants carried sensory memories with them. A grandmother in Santos frying cassave on a hot plate, insisting it tasted better than that Spanish bread. A father in New York buying yuca at a bodega, teaching his American-born children to peel and grate it the right way. Photos from family albums showed elders with high cheekbones, dark straight hair, features that suddenly matched illustrations in history books. The internet age accelerated the process. By the early 2000s, forums and then social media groups formed where people posted questions. My abuela always made this cassava bread and said it was de los indios. Does anyone know more? Responses poured in, scans of old books, links to Panay's account, grainy videos of revival areytos. DNA kits became affordable. Results landing in inboxes triggered private reckonings. 23% Indigenous Caribbean Taíno line, one message read, followed by tears and phone calls to distant relatives. These revelations often unlocked buried stories. An aunt might confess, your bisabuela never wanted to talk about it, but she said we come from the mountains where the old people hid. A cousin might pull out a wrapped bundle, a small stone figure, passed down with instructions never to sell or discard it. Suddenly the object had context, a zemi, perhaps an ancestor guardian. Families began researching, traveling to archaeological sites, attending cultural events. What began as curiosity became pilgrimage. Modern Taíno practice often centers on resensitizing the body to these inherited impressions. Workshops teach participants to make cassava bread by hand, no machines, feeling the texture change from wet pulp to dry flour to firm dough. Drum circles emphasize not just rhythm, but the vibration traveling up legs, into chest, syncing heartbeats. Cohoba ceremonies, using legal, non-hallucinogenic plant analogs or guided meditation, focus on breath, on opening the senses to subtle presences. Body painting sessions use natural pigments. As areyto dries on skin, people report feeling seen by something larger. Children in revival programs learn through immersion, planting conucos in community gardens, learning to weave cotton bands, hearing stories while lying in hammocks. They draw petroglyphs with chalk on sidewalks, carve small zemis from soapstone, dance areytos in parks. These acts are not performance, they are re-embodiment, re-teaching nerves and muscles patterns that went dormant. For many, the deepest layer surfaces in dreams or liminal states. Reports from participants describe visions during meditation or near sleep. A woman with painted face offering cassava, a circle of dancers under stars, a voice speaking in unfamiliar syllables that feel like home. Psychologists studying intergenerational trauma note parallels, echoes of ancestral experience bubbling up when the conscious mind relaxes. In Taíno revival spaces, such experiences are welcomed, interpreted collectively, often seen as direct communication from zemis or ancestors. This subconscious stratum resists erasure because it lives below language, below history books. It is carried in the autonomic responses, the inexplicable calm found near certain caves, the quickening pulse at the sound of specific drum patterns, the comfort of certain herbal scents. It manifests in art, poets writing lines that feel dictated, painters depicting scenes they never studied but remember, musicians composing melodies that echo areyto structures without formal training. As science catches up, neuroanthropology and epigenetics offer frameworks, trauma markers passed down generations, cultural practices reinforcing neural pathways, mirror neurons firing when watching revived dances as if participating. Yet no lab can measure the felt sense of belonging that comes when a person first hears an areyto and weeps without knowing why. We venture now into the most profound and elusive stratum yet, the silent communion between the Taíno legacy and the living earth of the Caribbean itself. Beyond bloodlines, beyond stories whispered in family kitchens, beyond even the subconscious impressions that rise in dreams or creative surges, there exists a relationship so intimate it defies separation. The way the islands remember the people who once called them home, and how that memory expresses itself through landscape, weather, plants, animals, seasons, and the very quality of light and air. This is where history becomes ecology, where cultural survival merges with planetary respiration. It is the quietest layer, the one that requires no words, only presence. Stand with me on a northern coast of Boracay at dawn. The sea is glass smooth, reflecting rose and gold. Mangroves breathe through their aerial roots, a heron lifts slowly from shallows. Behind you rises karst limestone, jagged, cave-riddled hills that once sheltered bohios and burial sites. If you place your palm against the rock, it holds residual warmth from yesterday's sun, but also something older. The slow pulse of stone that has witnessed human voices chanting to zemis, has absorbed smoke from cohoba pipes, has cradled the bones of generations. Geologists speak of limestone as compressed sea life over eons. The Taíno understood it as living kin, a womb from which the first people emerged according to myth. Walk inside one of these caves today, say Cuva del Indio or Cuva Ventana, and the air changes. Cooler, stiller, scented with damp mineral and faint bat guano. Echoes linger longer than they should. Many visitors report an inexplicable pressure in the chest, tears without cause, a sense of being gently observed. Park rangers and guides quietly acknowledge it. The old ones are here. They don't mind visitors, but they like respect. This is not superstition, it is attunement. The Taíno lived in reciprocal intimacy with place. They named rivers after qualities or ancestors. Yak equals spirit of strength, Kama equals sun-moon confluence. They planted ceiba trees near villages as axis mundi, world trees connecting underworld earth sky. They read weather signs not as abstract meteorology but as moods of spirits. Sudden wind shifts as guab insects stirring, heavy dew as Atabey weeping in compassion. When revival groups today return to these sites for ceremony, they often report the land responding, birds circling overhead at precise moments, breezes rising during songs, rain holding off until the last drumbeat fades. Skeptics call it coincidence, participants call it conversation. The flora itself carries memory. Cassava grows wild in abandoned clearings, its tough stems pushing through soil that has known no plow for centuries. Sweet potato vines trail over ruins, guava and mamey trees self-seed near old village sites. Herbalists in rural areas still use the same plants the Behiks favored: jagua for black dye and medicine, kopi for wound healing, tabanuco resin for incense. When a modern Taíno practitioner gathers leaves for a bath or tea, they often pause to ask permission, whispering thanks, leaving a small offering of tobacco or water. The act echoes ancient protocols: take only what is given freely, leave more than you take. Fauna remembers too. The husha, once a staple protein, survives in pockets on certain keys and in protected reserves. Its shy presence feels like a living relic. Parrots, once traded as gifts to Columbus, still flash green and red in forest canopies, their calls startlingly human-like. Coqui frogs, whose co-key chant fills nights, have become national symbols in Puerto Rico. Many elders say the sound is the voice of the land itself, unchanged since the first areytos. When revival dances happen outdoors, coquis often begin chorusing in rhythm, as if joining the song. Seasons themselves feel charged with ancestral cadence. The dry season, December-April, brings clear skies and steady trade winds, ideal for fishing, planting, long voyages in myth time. The wet season, May-November, arrives with heavy rains and sudden storms, time for weeding, storytelling indoors, preparing for hurricane threats. Modern Taíno groups mark these shifts with ceremonies: offerings at solstices, areytos under full moons, gratitude rituals after first rains. Participants describe feeling the island breathe with them: a subtle expansion in the chest when wind rises, a settling when rain falls. Light has its own memory. Caribbean sunlight carries a particular clarity, sharp near coasts, softer in valleys, golden at dusk. Photographers and painters from Taíno descent often speak of chasing that light, the one that makes green leaves glow from within, that turns sea into turquoise fire. It is the same illumination that once fell on Beatty dancers, on zemis carvings, on faces painted for ritual. When revival events happen at dawn or dusk, many report a thickening of the atmosphere, as if time folds and past and present overlap. In urban settings, this communion persists in unexpected ways. A concrete rooftop garden in Santos with cassava in pots, a balcony hammock swaying to salsa mixed with drum loops, a park bench where someone closes their eyes and smells the air, suddenly homesick for a place they've never lived. Diaspora Taíno in cold climates plant yucca indoors under grow lights, tend small ceiba seedlings, keep river stones on altars. The island calls through these proxies. Climate change adds urgency. Rising seas threaten coastal sites once lined with villages. Stronger hurricanes scour hillsides. Drought stresses root crops. Revival activists increasingly frame their work as environmental guardianship, honoring Atabey by protecting watersheds, planting native trees, advocating for land sovereignty. The struggle is both cultural and ecological, to keep the memory of balance alive as the balance itself frays. At the deepest level, this is not about ownership or proof. It is about belonging. The Taíno did not conquer the islands, they entered into relationship with them. That relationship endures in the way mist rises from mountains at dawn, in the way roots seek water through limestone cracks, in the way wind moves through leaves like breath through a song. Descendants do not need to prove descent, they need only show up, listen, respond. And now we arrive softly at the quiet close of this long journey together. We have walked hand in hand through emerald hills and starlit deities, through the first astonished greetings on sandy shores and the long silence that followed catastrophe. We have listened to the low pulse of drums that once filled central plazas and to the subtler rhythms that still move through blood, breath, soil, and sky centuries later. We have felt the weight of unimaginable loss and the lightness of persistent remembering. We have traveled from the origins of a people who crossed vast waters in great canoes through centuries of balance and beauty into the shattering collision of worlds and onward through hidden refuges, blended families, whispered songs, DNA echoes, revived ceremonies, and the patient companionship of the islands themselves. What remains is not an ending, but a gentle invitation to carry the story forward in whatever small, private ways feel true to you. The Taíno world before and after 1492 was never just a chapter in someone else's textbook. It was and is a living conversation between ancestors and descendants, between people and place, between what was taken and what quietly refused to be erased. Every time someone plants a cassava cutting with care, strings a hammock between two trees, listens to coqui frogs at dusk and feels an inexplicable homecoming, or simply pauses to thank the earth for its gifts, that conversation continues. It does not require perfect reconstruction or unbroken lineage. It asks only for presence, respect, and the willingness to listen when the wind, the waves, or your own heartbeat seems to carry a familiar cadence. In the end, this is what resilience looks like, not loud triumph, but quiet persistence. Not the absence of wounds, but the choice to keep breathing through them, to keep planting, singing, dreaming, remembering. The Taíno did not survive by remaining unchanged. They survived by becoming part of everything that came after: the food on tables across continents, the words we still use without thinking, the mixed bloodlines of millions, the cultural revival circles under electric lights and solar lamps, the environmental pleas spoken in the name of Atabey today. So as this narration draws to its final breath, let it leave you with peace rather than conclusion. Picture yourself now wherever you are, lying back in the dark. Let the sounds around you soften, traffic into distant surf, air conditioning into trade wind sigh, city hum into the low thrum of a single Yúcahu drum far away. Feel your body settle, heavy and held. Imagine a hammock cradling you, woven by hands that learned the motion generations ago. Above you, the same stars wheel that once watched areytos on Hispaniola, Boricane, Zaymaca, Quisquaya. Somewhere a ceiba tree stretches toward them, roots drinking from the same aquifer that nourished ancient conucos. You do not need to do anything more tonight. Simply rest in the knowledge that you have been listening to something ancient and unbroken. Let that awareness wrap around you like a soft cotton mantle. The Taíno world was real. It was beautiful. It was wounded deeply. And it is still here, in the taste of fresh cassave, in the comfort of a hammock sway, in the way certain caves hold your voice a second longer, in every person who chooses to remember rather than forget. Thank you for spending these hours with me, for letting the story breathe in your ears as you drifted towards sleep. May your dreams be gentle, filled with turquoise water, green light filtering through palm fronds, and the quiet certainty that some things endure. If this journey touched you, if it helped you fall asleep with a sense of wonder or connection, I'd love to ask a small favor before we part. Please consider subscribing to the channel so you never miss another long, calming history story designed especially for bedtime. Hit that subscribe button. It really helps Small History for Sleep creators keep bringing these peaceful narrations to you. If you enjoyed this, drop a comment below and let everyone know, where are you watching from tonight? Are you in the Caribbean listening to the real waves, curled up somewhere in North America, Europe, Asia, Africa, Australia? Maybe in a city apartment or a quiet village. Share your location, just country or region is perfect. It's beautiful to see how far these island echoes travel. Your comments, your likes, your shares, they keep the circle growing. Sleep deeply, dear friends, the ancestors are near. The islands remember, and so do we. Good night.